Hello, Awesome Soul here, and have you ever wondered what exactly makes a ritual spell, and what you need in order to actually homebrew a ritual spell? Well, look no further than this video. Today we're going to go over the five key things you're going to need to look into and think about when making a ritual spell of your very own. So today we're going to go over the 5 points and how important they are, or how necessary they are to making a homebrew spell. And after that, we're going to go in depth and give examples of them in action. So we're going to take a look at a first level official ritual spell and a 9th level homebrew spell of my own design, and sort of go over my design process with that. But first things first, what are these 5 points? Well, there are 2 points that I consider basically mandatory. You can't make a ritual spell without these 2 points. And then there are 3 additional points that you should consider, but don't necessarily have to use all of them. Ideally, what you should be aiming for, and what it generally seems like most of the official ritual spells have, they use about 4 out of the 5 of these, though all of them have the important ones. And speaking of, let's jump into the first important bit. So, the first key thing you're going to need when making a ritual spell is it has some sort of built-in reason not to spam the spell. This could be some sort of limiting factor in the spell itself, or rather simply, the casting time. Now, rituals normally, unless you have some sort of weird special homebrew quirk, it adds a 10-minute addition to the typical casting time. So if you have an action ritual spell, that is 6 seconds plus 10 minutes. But if you have a 1 hour casting time, it's going to be 1 hour plus the additional 10-minute ritual time. So that's kind of how you can balance it in that regard. But of course, we'll go over this a little bit more when we look at the 2 examples. The next point you need to look at is your ritual spell is going to deal no damage. Interestingly enough, though, there are actually 3 ritual spells in the game that do call out damage. However, 2 of these spells are talking about damage in regards to potential hazardous self-damage. And there is 1 spell that is a ritual that actually does deal damage. However, it requires a lot of setup, it's very situational, and can be avoided. But this is another one that is basically mandatory, so unless you have a very, very, very good reason for your ritual spell to deal damage, I would flat out avoid this. The next 3 points are a little bit more fast and loose. You can probably go without one of the following, but I would generally try and, like I said earlier, aim to have 4 out of the 5 of these when making your ritual spell. Now, the first one of these we're going to look at is your spell has a casting time greater than 1 action. This one is a little fast and loose, so about approximately half of the ritual spells follow this rule. The other half have 1 action casting times, though it's not really that big a deal, because like I said, if it is a ritual, it's still flat out adding that 10-minute casting time onto it. So that's kind of why this one's a little bit weaker of a rule, but I still figured I'd point this out anyway. Just because, like I said, about half of them have it, so just something to consider. The next rule is gold cost, one that is usually consumed, though a decent amount of rituals don't actually consume anything. If you somehow don't know, a spell with a material component that costs gold will say that it is actually consumed upon use. So if you have, like, a spell, for example, let's say the material component is a marble that costs at least 10 GP. If you just left it there, All you need to have on your person is this marble, and it is not consumed. When you're making your own spell, however, after that material component callout, you would then put which the spell consumes in order for the marble to magically vanish once you're casting the spell. And the last of the looser rules is a duration greater than instantaneous. Now, this one is a little bit more sturdy, I guess we can say, than the other two, as the majority of ritual spells actually do follow this rule. Though there are a few that don't, and interestingly enough, we'll get to that in the example. I'll make sure to call that out. And speaking of rituals, let's go over the example I talked about. The first level spell, Find Familiar, quite possibly the most well-known ritual spell in the game. And let's go through our checklist and see how this one stacks up. So, I'm sure most of you are familiar with how, well, Find Familiar works. If you're not, feel free to read through this and pause and all that jazz, but we're just simply looking at the key points and looking over how they function with this spell. So first things first, a built-in reason not to spam the spell. Well, that very clearly gets a checkmark, because not only does this have a built-in casting time of 1 hour, plus the additional ritual time, you can only ever have one familiar at a time from this spell. So, that one checks out. Next up, does this spell deal damage? No. Normally, when you're summoning some sort of creature, it would probably have some sort of action in its stat block. And if it doesn't have an action, it can just go ahead and punch things. This spell specifically calls out that the familiar cannot attack, meaning that you can't even get your familiar to do a 1 damage punch. So, that's the first two, the very important ones out of the way. Things are looking pretty solid so far. Point number 3, a casting time greater than 1 action. And, very clearly, it checks out. Not much else to say there. Does Find Familiar have a gold cost? Yes. Yes, it does. You can see at the bottom there, it requires 10 GP worth of charcoal, incense, and herbs, which must be consumed in the fire of a brass brazier. So not only does this have a gold cost associated with it, it is in fact consumed. So that's 4 out of the 5, and at least for me, that's what I consider a perfect ritual spell. As long as it has 4 out of the 5, you're pretty good to go. But let's take a look at the last one anyway. So, does it have a duration greater than instantaneous? And that is yes? Question mark? So, the spell actually does say that its duration is instantaneous. But what that's referring to, at least in this case, is that the spell is summoning the creature. And has it successfully summoned the creature? Yes, so it is an instantaneous summon. However, I'm sure you are probably aware that the summon does actually stick around for, well, ever, really, until you dismiss it or it dies, and then you simply cast the spell again. So even though Find Familiar is technically written that its duration is instantaneous, I would say that this one actually gets a check mark for this point as well. Meaning that Find Familiar gets a 5 out of 5. It is absolutely qualified to be a ritual spell. Would ya look at that? Wow. An official spell that actually checks out to be a ritual spell? Who would have thunk it? But let's take a look at something spicier. Something homebrewed. Something 9th level. So, the spell you're looking at here is Design Domain. This is part of the Soulforged spellbook project that I've been putting together over the past little while now. If you want it for free, that's right, free, you can go take a look over at my Patreon. There should be a download link over there. Again, that is free, by the way. Although patrons do get early access to it. Anyway, shameless plug over. Design Domain, TLDR version, is you sit down, you spend a lot of money, and you make your own demi-plane. Of course, it's not going to be fully large at the beginning. You're going to have to make it grow over time by recasting the spell. However, casting the spell over and over again is not going to consume your components. There's like multiple ways to cast the spell. Anyway, you can go ahead and pause and read if you so wish. But what we're here to do is to, of course, go over our checklist. And this is mainly for me to prove that it is possible to design 9th level ritual spells. Just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. Anyway, let's go over our first point. Does it have a built-in reason not to spam the spell? Well, it has 2. The casting time, obviously, 8 hours, or 8 hours and 10 minutes if you want to do a ritual, which basically is an entire adventuring day. So this is something you would need to do in your downtime, even if you decided to cast it with a spell slot, which at that point, why wouldn't you just do it as a ritual? Especially because you're going to be giving up something a lot more valuable than just a spell slot that you can get back after a long rest, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The other point is that, much like Find Familiar, you can only ever have one demiplane at once. You can't have multiple, so you have to make sure your demiplane is to your proper specifications. Of course, if you wanted to have an entire party of wizards, or bards or sorcerers for that matter, running around with design domain, all making... Ooh, this is actually... Okay, very, very interesting tangent here, but I figured I'd throw it in. What if you get all of your characters, bard, sorcerer, wizard, to 9th level, you now all cast design domain after raiding multiple dragon hordes, and you make a interconnected theme park out of your domains. That would be pretty cool. Anyway, sorry for the tangent, but that was too funny not to put in there. Anyway, that's one of the important ones out of the way, but what about the other one? And that is, does this spell deal damage? No. No, it does not. It literally just makes a domain for you. The thing here, also, that I would like to point out, is that this spell cannot create buildings or structures, and therefore you're not going to be able to make, I don't know, like a fortress with like a smushing wall in it. You know what I mean? You would have to design your domain with natural terrain and then bring in builders to do that. So the spell itself, no. I mean, really, you can just hire builders to make a smushing machine outside of a domain anyway, so kind of a weird point to make, I suppose. But I'm the one who made it. So, anyway, moving on. Those are the 2 important ones. So far, so good. Well, golly gee, it's looking like, maybe you can actually make ritual spells of 9th level. Who would have thunk it? But we've got 3 more to go. The first one, does it have a casting time greater than 1 action? A little bit more. Just slightly more. Basically 8 hours more. Yeah, so that one checks out. How about a gold cost? Yeah, this is what I was saying before. It's a lot more costly than a 9th level spell slot, in the fact that this is 50,000 GP worth of gems that is consumed. However, at 9th level, you're most likely going to have that kind of amount of money. Let's face it, this is called Dungeons and Dragons. What do dragons usually have? A dragon horde. So, honestly, what you could do is just go slay a dragon, cast this spell in their lair, and you'd probably have all the material components right there. Assuming it's like an ancient dragon or something. You know what I mean. So, gold cost and consumed. Double check for that one. And last but not least, is the duration greater than instantaneous? The duration is special? Yes, that's right. The way this spell works is, initially while you're casting the spell, it's a little fragile, so to speak. Like, it can be dispelled by other people that know about it. But once you reach maximum size after casting the spell over and over and over again, which is something you'd probably want to be doing as a downtime activity, it becomes permanent and can't be dispelled by anyone but the owner. Now, the reason I put special in there is because what I kind of alluded to before, the spell does have multiple ways of being cast, so I figured that was kind of necessary. But yeah, there we have it. Not only does the first one we looked at qualify for all 5, but my own beloved design domain does qualify. So hopefully this video has taught you a few things. That 1, 9th level ritual spells are totally viable and fine for the game. And 2, you've actually learnt that there is a method to this madness when it comes to making ritual spells. Hopefully this little checklist will aid you in your quest to design your own homebrew ritual spells. Let me know what kind of spells you create down below. I would love to hear it. Anyways, with that out of the way, I of course have been the Awesome Soul, and you should definitely check out the Patreon for a link to the Soulforge spellbook, and maybe some other goodies over there that might pique your interest. Anyway, shameless plug out of the way. What else am I forgetting? Ah yes, subscribe for more content like this. I'm hoping to put out more little videos like this in the future. But enough plugging. Let's get to ending the video. I, of course, have been the Awesome Soul. I thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.